The winter wind whistled through the broken window frames of the old house, carrying with it a biting cold that made the little girl shiver even indoors. She was only 8 years old, fragile, and clinging to the single object that allowed her to walk with some dignity: her wooden crutch. It wasn't polished or new. It was rough, handmade, but it was hers. Without it, every step became torture. Her stepmother, a woman with sharp eyes and a cruel smile, had grown increasingly irritated by the sound of the girl's slow steps and the sight of her leaning on that crutch. To her, it wasn't a symbol of courage or resilience. It was a nuisance, a reminder of weakness that she refused to tolerate. "Stand up properly," the woman snapped, yanking the crutch from the girl's hand. The child collapsed instantly, her thin legs unable to hold her weight. She fell to the wooden floor with a dull thud, the breath knocked out of her chest. Her stepmother smirked as if satisfied by the sound. The little girl's eyes filled with tears. She stretched out her trembling hands toward the stepmother and cried out, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please, don't take my crutch. I can't walk without it." Her voice echoed through the empty house, but it carried no weight for the woman standing above her. The stepmother's fingers tightened around the crutch, and she tilted her head mockingly. "You're nothing but a burden," she sneered. "Crawling is all you deserve. Maybe then you'll learn to stop depending on others." The girl's small body shook as sobs escaped her throat. She pressed her palms against the cold floor, trying to push herself upright, but her legs buckled, leaving her trapped in helplessness. Her cries grew louder, the sound raw and heartbreaking. "Please, Mommy. Please give it back." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The stepmother turned her back, walking away with the crutch in her hand as if it were some worthless stick she planned to throw outside into the snow. The girl dragged herself across the floor, her knees scraping against the wood. Her little fingers reached toward the stepmother, but the distance grew wider with every step the woman took. Memories of her real mother, soft hands, gentle lullabies, the warm reassurance that she was loved, flashed through her mind. That comfort had been stolen from her too soon. And now, in its place, there was only coldness and cruelty. Her cries grew weaker, her voice rasping, but she continued, "Please, don't take it." The house seemed to grow colder with each word, as if even the walls pitied her. But the stepmother's heart remained unmoved. Outside, the world went on, cars passing, people laughing in the distance. Unaware that inside this house, a little girl's dignity was being stripped away. She had learned long ago that neighbors wouldn't help. They had seen her limping in the yard and turned away, muttering that she was cursed or that her father should have chosen a healthier child. And yet, despite all of it, the girl held on to one fragile hope. Somewhere out there, someone would see her pain. Someone would care. Her small hands trembled as she pressed them to the window frame, staring at the street outside. The snow glistened under the pale light of the lampposts. She whispered to herself, a prayer more than a plea. "Please, let someone hear me. Let someone come." The faint roar of an engine grew closer, its sound breaking the silence of the night. Headlights cut through the fog, casting long beams across the street. The little girl blinked, her tears catching the light as she turned toward it. For a moment, she thought it was just another passerby, another soul that would ignore her. But then, the car slowed. It was black, sleek, far too polished for this broken neighborhood. Its tires crunched against the snow as it pulled to a stop right outside her house. The girl's heart skipped a beat. The stepmother, still holding the crutch, turned sharply toward the window, her face twisting with sudden unease. The engine cut off. Silence fell again, but it was the heavy silence of something about to change. The door of the car opened slowly, deliberately. A tall man stepped out, his coat sweeping behind him, his face hidden in the shadow of the streetlight. But the way he moved, the authority in his posture, the fury radiating from him, made the air itself feel charged. The little girl froze, her tears still wet on her cheeks, her body trembling. She didn't know who he was yet, but something inside her whispered, "Hope has arrived." And for the first time that night, her desperate cries seemed to find an answer. The man's shadow loomed outside the house, long and imposing under the lamplight. The little girl stayed frozen by the window, her small hands trembling as she pressed them against the glass. The cruel woman still gripped the crutch in one hand, her jaw tightening, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. For a moment, there was silence. Then, 3 firm knocks shook the door. Not polite, not hesitant, but strong and commanding, the kind of sound that makes walls vibrate and hearts stop. The stepmother stiffened, her cruel confidence faltering. She hissed at the child on the floor. Not a word. You hear me? Not a word. But the little girl, gasping through her tears, couldn't stop the tiny whisper that escaped her lips. Help me. The door swung open with such force that it banged against the wall. Snowflakes swirled in with the night air, and in the doorway stood the man. His eyes were sharp, blazing with anger, and though he wore an expensive coat, his expression was wild, like a storm that had finally found its target. The stepmother quickly faked a smile, her voice sugary sweet. "Oh, we weren't expecting visitors," she began. But her voice trembled. The man's eyes darted past her. And then he saw her. The girl. On the floor. Her face streaked with tears. Her legs too weak to hold her. And the empty space beside her, where a crutch should have been. Something inside him cracked. He stepped forward, his boots heavy on the old wooden floor, and the child's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but when their eyes met, she felt something she hadn't felt in so long: safety. The stepmother moved quickly, holding the crutch tighter. "She's fine," she lied, her tone sharp. "Just clumsy, that's all. Always exaggerating, always begging for pity. You know how children are." "Shut up." His voice cut through the air like a blade. Deep, furious, undeniable. The woman froze, her lips parting in shock. No one had ever spoken to her like that inside her own home. He bent down to the little girl, his large hands gentle as he reached for her. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly, though his eyes were still burning with rage. The girl's throat tightened. Her lips trembled, and she struggled to form words. All she could do was lift one trembling finger toward the crutch in the woman's hand. The man's gaze followed. His jaw clenched. His chest rose and fell with restrained fury. "That belongs to her," he growled. The stepmother tried to laugh, though the sound cracked. "This old stick. Oh, she doesn't need it. She's just dramatic. Always pretending." But the girl interrupted, her voice weak, desperate. "Please, give it back. I can't walk without it." Her words shattered the room. The man reached out, and in a single motion, he ripped the crutch from the stepmother's hand. She gasped, stumbling backward as though the act had physically wounded her. The girl clutched the crutch as if it were a lifeline, tears spilling fresh down her cheeks. She pressed it against her side, trying to lift herself upright, but her strength failed. And before she could fall again, the man scooped her up into his arms. For the first time in years, she felt warmth, not just from his coat, but from the way he held her, steady, protective, as though she was the most precious thing in the world. The stepmother's face twisted with anger now that her act had crumbled. "Who do you think you are, barging into my house? You can't just..." He turned his head slowly toward her, and the look in his eyes silenced her immediately. "Who am I?" His voice was low, dangerous. "I'm the man who's about to make sure this child never suffers another day because of you." The girl's heart raced. She didn't understand everything, but she clung to the sound of his words. They didn't feel like a stranger's. They felt like a promise. The stepmother sputtered, trying to regain control. "You can't just take her. She's my responsibility." Responsibility. His voice thundered, shaking the walls. "You call this cruelty responsibility? You don't deserve to be in the same room as her." The girl buried her face against his chest, overwhelmed, but her tiny hand clung to his coat. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. For the first time, someone had stood up for her. He took a step toward the door, still carrying her. The stepmother followed, shouting insults, her voice rising shrill with desperation. "You'll regret this. You think you can just walk away with her? Who do you think you are?" But the man didn't turn back. He simply tightened his hold on the girl and whispered softly, so only she could hear. You'll never beg for a crutch again. Not while I'm here." As the cold night air brushed against her cheeks, the headlights of the black car glowed like beacons of salvation. She closed her eyes, exhausted but hopeful. For the first time in her short life, her story was no longer just about pain. Something was changing. And deep inside she believed, no, she knew, that this man wasn't just anyone. He was more than a savior. He was connected to her in ways she couldn't yet understand. The car's interior was warm, softly lit, smelling faintly of leather and winter cologne. The little girl rested against the man's chest in the back seat, her fingers still hooked to his coat. Outside, the stepmother's voice shrieked through the night, muffled now by the closed door, the sound shrinking with distance as the driver pulled away from the curb. Slowly, the man told the driver, "Avoid the potholes." "Yes, sir." He adjusted the seatbelt around the child with a gentleness that made her throat ache. Every movement said what words could not. "You're safe now. I've got you." She stared up at him, at the way the lamps along the street carved lines in his face. Strong, tired, angry. But when his gaze dropped to her, the anger softened into something that made her chest feel warm in a way she barely remembered. "Does it hurt?" he asked. She nodded once. "Only when I try to stand too long. We'll see a doctor." "Doctors are expensive," she whispered, as if saying it out loud could make him change his mind. He exhaled softly. "Not tonight." The driver's eyes met the man's in the rearview mirror, a silent conversation passing between them. The car drifted past dark storefronts and sleeping houses. Snow powdered the sidewalks like sugar. The girl's crutch lay across their knees. He kept a protective hand over it, as if the cruel night might reach in and steal it again. "What's your name?" he asked finally, voice low. She told him. It sounded fragile in the air, like a bell that had been rung too many times and was afraid to sing. "And your mother?" Her lips trembled. She used to hum when it rained. She's not here anymore." He didn't ask the next question. The car filled with the quiet of things people don't say. Then he looked at her, really looked, at the slope of her nose, the deep-set eyes, the small gap in her left eyebrow where an old cut had healed. He touched his own brow absent-mindedly, mirroring her. "Do I know you?" she asked, the words tumbling out before fear could swallow them. His jaw tightened. "You should have," he said, and it sounded like an apology that had waited too long at a closed door. They didn't stop at a hospital. He took her to a clinic where lights still burned late. The sign outside said orthopedics and pediatrics. Emergency access. The receptionist straightened when they entered. She recognized the man immediately and stood as if gravity had changed. "Of course, mister." She stopped at his look and simply gestured. "This way." Rooms opened for them the way water opens for a ship's bow. Nurses moved with swift competence, laying blankets, bringing warm packs for the child's feet and gentle, steaming tea that smelled of honey and chamomile. The girl looked from face to face as if she had wandered into a story she was afraid to wake from. A doctor with kind eyes examined her leg. Asking questions the girl tried her best to answer without trembling. He tested reflexes, watched her attempt to stand with the crutch, measured the length of her legs, the angle of her hip. When she winced, his touch grew feather-soft. "Some of this is congenital," he explained, turning to the man. "Some is neglect. She needs physical therapy, proper footwear, maybe an orthopedic brace fitted correctly. The crutch is a temporary aid, not a sentence." "How soon can we begin?" the man said. "Tonight we reduce the inflammation and pain," the doctor replied. "Tomorrow we start building the rest." He crouched to the girl's eye level. "You are stronger than you think," he told her. "And you will stand taller than you imagine." She nodded, a shy spark of pride igniting beside the fear. As the doctor left to prepare prescriptions, the man sat beside her on the narrow bed, elbows on his knees. He didn't crowd her. He simply waited, eyes on the floor, as if he were the one bracing for news. The fluorescent light hummed quietly above them. "Why did you come to my house?" the girl asked at last. He looked up. "Because someone told me," he said. "Someone who should have told me a long time ago." Footsteps whispered in the hall. The receptionist walked by, pretending not to look at them, then failed at pretending. The driver stood near the door, a steady pillar, face unreadable. "I tried to be good," the girl blurted, the words spilling like marbles. "I washed dishes. I kept quiet. I learned how to move without making the floor creak. I didn't cry much. Only when it hurt too much to. He reached for her hand, stopped, and then, very carefully, rested his palm over her small knuckles. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. Each word felt heavy enough to anchor a drifting boat. Her eyes searched his face. Are you? He swallowed. "Your father," he said. Not as a question. Not as a hope. As a fact. The room tilted slightly, the way it does when trains pass underground and you only notice because the water in a glass trembles. She took a breath so sharp it seemed to sting. "My father. I should have been there," he said, voice gravel-edged. "I signed papers I didn't read because I believed a lie I wanted to be true. I thought your mother moved on and didn't want," he broke off, rubbing his thumb over her knuckles. "When I learned the truth, I went to the address I had. I was late. Your mother was gone. And then I looked for you. Everywhere." She stared at him, not understanding all the pieces, but feeling the warmth of the picture they built. "Did you stop because it was hard?" "I stopped sleeping," he said simply. "I didn't stop looking." Silence again, but a different kind. Not the kind that swallows you. The kind that lets you breathe inside it. The doctor returned, explaining medications and a temporary brace for the night, a soft support that hugged her calf and ankle like patient hands. The man listened to everything, repeating instructions back until the doctor nodded, satisfied. They arranged a morning appointment for x-rays, a gait assessment, a meeting with a therapist whose laugh rolled down the hall like sunlight. When the clinic finally emptied around them, the driver fetched a small bag, warm socks, a wool hat, a cardigan that smelled faintly of cedar and rain. They were new but felt already hers. The man helped her with the socks, threading each toe carefully, as if threading pearls onto a string. "Where will we go?" she asked as he lifted her gently from the bed. "Somewhere with thick walls and a kitchen that remembers how soup should taste," he said. A tiny smile pulled at one corner of his mouth, wry and apologetic all at once. "And no broken windows." The car slid through the sleeping city toward a neighborhood with tall gates and quiet guards who recognized the license plate and lifted the barrier without a word. The house at the end of the drive was not a house so much as a promise kept. Warm lights behind high windows, the glow of a fireplace licking the edges of the night. He carried her inside. Floors didn't creak here. They whispered. A clock somewhere ticked like a calm heartbeat. Photographs lined a hallway. Landscapes, oceans, he and people she didn't know yet, all framed in the same dark wood. On a side table, a silver frame faced the door, as if greeting anyone who entered. He hesitated, then picked it up and turned it toward her. It was a picture of a woman with gentle eyes, taken in a rain-streaked cafe window. She was laughing at something off camera, hair damp around her cheeks, her hand midair in a gesture that looked a lot like the way the girl's hand moved when she reached for sunlight in the morning. "My mother," the girl breathed. "Yes," he said. His voice barely made it past the word. He set the frame back carefully, then led her to a room where soft quilts waited and curtains drifted like slow waves. He settled her onto the bed and placed the crutch within arm's reach, not because he wanted her to need it, but because he wanted her to know it would never be taken again. "Tomorrow," he said, kneeling so his eyes were level with hers, "we start rebuilding. Muscles. Trust. Mornings. Whatever you want. We'll do it slowly. We'll do it together." She nodded, swallowing a lump of something that felt like joy wearing a coat of fear. "Will I fall?" "Yes," he said honestly. "But you'll have hands to catch you." A soft tap sounded at the door. The driver peered in, holding a tray. "Soup," he said. And bread still warm. Her stomach, shy until then, remembered how to speak. They ate slowly. The soup tasted like the answer to a question she'd asked every night before sleep. When the bowl was empty and the room folded into the hush of midnight, he rose to leave. His hand hovered over the light switch, then paused. "Do you want the door open?" She took a breath. A little, she whispered. He opened it just enough for the hallway light to pour in like a path. As he turned to go, she found courage running at last in her legs. Maybe not the kind that stands, but the kind that calls. "Dad," she said. The word startled the room. It startled him. He froze, shoulders tight, then turned back with an expression that broke and mended at the same time. "Yes." "Will you be here in the morning?" He didn't blink. "I'll be here when you wake," he said. "And when you take your first step. And when you take your 10th. And when you no longer count." She nodded, gripping the quilt. He closed the light, left the door open, and his footsteps faded down the hall. Somewhere in the house, a fire settled into embers like a lullaby. The girl lay very still, listening not for threats or shouting or the stealth of disappointment, but for the simple sound of another person breathing in the next room. The crutch waited beside her, no longer a weapon thieves could brandish, but a rung on a ladder she was finally allowed to climb. In the hallway, the photograph of her mother caught a stripe of lamplight, and for a heartbeat the rain on the cafe window looked like falling snow. She smiled into the pillow and, for the first time in a long time, slept without bargaining with the dark. The morning rose pale and cold, the kind of winter light that softened the world but never truly warmed it. The little girl opened her eyes slowly, startled for a moment by the silence. No shouts. No threats. Only the faint crackle of a fire somewhere in the house and the smell of warm bread drifting through the air. Her crutch leaned against the bedside table, waiting patiently. Not stolen, not dangled out of reach, not turned into a weapon of humiliation, but there as if to say, "You are safe now. No one can take me away again." Her father stepped into the room with a tray balanced in his hands, a cup of hot chocolate, steam curling upward, and a small bowl of porridge glistening with honey. He set it down gently and asked the simplest questions, questions she hadn't heard in years. "Did you sleep well? Is the pain better? Do you feel strong enough to try?" He helped her sit up, tucked the pillow behind her, and listened carefully to her soft replies. His hands were steady, his voice calm. For the first time, she felt what it was to be cared for without conditions. Later that morning, the physiotherapist arrived, a kind woman with warm eyes who showed the girl slow stretches, breathing exercises, and how to place her weight carefully on the crutch. "Strength is not about rushing," the therapist said. "Strength is about steady steps." The girl nodded bravely and, with trembling determination, managed 2 tiny steps across the rug. She looked up, and her father's eyes shone with pride. It was then that the doorbell rang. A sharp, insistent sound that pierced the fragile peace of the house. The driver moved quickly toward the gate, and the father's expression hardened. The girl froze, her fingers tightening around the crutch, as though her body already knew who it must be. The intercom buzzed, and a voice from the gate announced, "A woman is here. She says she's family. She insists on coming inside." Her father pressed the screen, and there she was, the stepmother, wrapped in a heavy coat, eyes flashing with venom, and beside her a man in a wrinkled suit clutching a thick folder. Behind them lingered a couple of neighbors, curious eyes hungry for spectacle. The stepmother's voice was shrill, cold, certain. "Open the gate. I've come to collect what belongs to me." The girl's chest tightened. Her father stepped closer to the camera, his voice low and steady. "She is not an object, and she does not belong to you." The woman smirked. "The law says otherwise. My lawyer will explain." She tapped the man beside her, who fumbled with the folder and pulled out yellowed documents stamped with official seals. Guardianship papers, transfers, court orders, all signed. "She is under my legal care," the stepmother declared, holding the papers high as if they were swords. "And removing her without my consent is kidnapping." The father's jaw tightened. He turned to his daughter, who had wheeled herself to the edge of the hallway, peering nervously toward the front door. "Stay inside," he whispered. "I'll take care of this." He walked out into the biting air, coat whipping in the wind. The stepmother straightened, smug now that she stood on familiar ground, the ground of lies and forged authority. "Hand her over," she demanded, "or I'll have the police here within the hour." The neighbors whispered to each other, their eyes darting between the man in the expensive coat and the furious woman clutching her folder. To them, it looked like a battle of power. To the girl, it was a battle of survival. Her father raised his voice, not in a shout, but in a tone so commanding the air seemed to still. "That child is mine. You kept her from me through deception. You used forged documents. I have every proof." From his coat pocket, he pulled out a slim folder of his own, papers crisp, recent, bearing stamps far fresher than the stepmother's faded copies. Court orders filed last week. DNA confirmation. Fraud investigation underway. Your custody is void. The stepmother's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Lies," she hissed. "You think money can erase the years I've spent raising her?" Raising. His voice thundered now, echoing against the stone walls of the gate. "You call stripping her dignity raising? You call stealing her crutch and throwing her to the floor raising? You've done nothing but break her, and that ends today." The girl, clutching her crutch inside the house, could see it through the open doorway, the moment the mask slipped. The neighbors drew back as the stepmother's sneer faltered under the weight of the truth. The man in the wrinkled suit shifted nervously, tugging at his tie. "Perhaps we should discuss this in court," he mumbled, already sensing the battle was lost. But her father stepped forward, closer, his eyes burning into the woman who had tormented his child. "You will not set foot in her life again. Not as long as I breathe. Walk away now, before the law itself drags you farther than you're willing to go." The silence stretched. The neighbors whispered. And for the first time, the stepmother looked small. Not powerful, not untouchable. Just a woman cornered by the very cruelty she thought would protect her. She hissed one last threat, shoving the folder back into her bag. "You'll regret this. You'll see." Then she turned sharply on her heel and stormed down the street, the lawyer scurrying after her. The father stood tall, breathing hard, but when he turned back toward the door, his expression softened. Inside, the little girl gripped her crutch and looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "It's over," he said firmly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. He knelt before her, brushing a tear from her cheek. "She will never touch you again. You're safe." The girl buried her face against his chest, holding him tightly as though afraid the moment might vanish like a dream. But it didn't. The warmth of his embrace was solid, real, stronger than any paper or false word. For the first time, the girl allowed herself to believe in tomorrow. The next morning, the house was quiet except for the steady crackle of the fireplace and the soft sound of footsteps moving in the hall. The little girl stirred beneath the heavy quilt, her eyes blinking open to golden light seeping through the curtains. For the first time in years, she had slept without nightmares clawing at her dreams. Her father was already there, seated by the window with a cup of coffee in his hand. He smiled when he saw her awaken. "Good morning," he said simply, as though the words themselves could weave safety into the air. She rubbed her eyes, unsure if the events of the night before had been real. Had he truly stood in the cold, facing down the woman who had tormented her? Had he really told her she would never be alone again? "Was it just a dream?" she whispered. He set down the cup and crossed the room, kneeling beside her bed. "No dream," he promised. "You are here, with me, and nothing will take you away." The words were a balm, sinking deep into wounds too old for her age. She clutched his sleeve, needing to feel the truth of it. And when his hand covered hers, steady and warm, the fear finally began to loosen. Later that day, papers were delivered, official seals, stamp signatures, legal acknowledgments. The investigation had moved quickly, propelled by evidence too strong to deny. The stepmother's custody was revoked. Charges for neglect and fraud were filed. The neighbors who once turned away whispered a different story now, their silence broken by shame. The little girl didn't understand all the details, but she understood this. She would never return to that house again. The chain had broken. Her father kept his promise. Doctors came. Specialists adjusted braces to fit her legs with precision, measuring angles, correcting balance. A physiotherapist visited daily, guiding her through careful exercises. Some days were easier than others. Some days ended in frustration. tears sliding down her cheeks when her body betrayed her. But every time she stumbled, every time the pain threatened to defeat her, she felt his hands behind her, steadying her, refusing to let her fall. "You can," he would whisper. "And when you can't, I'll be here until you can again." Step by step, her world grew wider. She learned to walk short distances with the new brace, her crutch supporting but not imprisoning her. Each small victory sparked a smile that lit the room brighter than any lamp. One afternoon, weeks later, she stood at the edge of the garden path. The air was crisp, and the sun warmed the frost-covered grass. Her father crouched a few feet ahead, arms open. "Just try," he said gently. She lifted the crutch, set her foot down, and took one step. Her body trembled, but she didn't fall. She took another, then another. When she reached him, collapsing into his embrace, laughter spilled out of her chest. Real laughter, unbroken, unafraid. He held her tightly, his own eyes wet. "See, you were never weak," he whispered. "You were just waiting for someone to see your strength." That night, sitting by the fire with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, she leaned against him and asked, "Will it always hurt?" "Maybe a little," he admitted honestly. "But pain doesn't decide your life. Love does. And you will never walk alone again." She nodded, her eyelids heavy, and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." The word felt strange on her tongue, but it glowed in the air between them, filling the silence with something stronger than promises, belonging. And so began her new life. A life where mornings smelled of bread instead of fear. Where nights ended with lullabies of safety, not screams. Where her crutch was a tool, not a weapon used against her. The cruel woman who once stole her dignity faded into the background. Stripped of power, her lies exposed. What remained was the bond between a father and his daughter, reforged in fire and tears but stronger for it. For the little girl, every step forward was a declaration. I am not broken. I am not forgotten. I am loved. If this story touched your heart, if you believe no child should beg for dignity but should always be met with love, support Cryspire. Subscribe, share, and let these stories reach more hearts. Because together, we can turn pain into hope and tears into strength.